Our kind of keynote speaker right now is Russ Armstrong. So Russ is a sales and finance leader and co-founder of Limelight Platform, the world's first experiential marketing cloud. He now heads up business development in the eastern regions for Boast Capital, the only SR&ED automation solution on the market. Welcome, Russ.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to join you guys here today. I'm going to go ahead, I guess, kick it off here. I'll share my screen and kind of go through my deck and everything. So I'm just going to get that going here. I just want to make sure everybody can see the screen okay. Is it coming up, the SaaS Sales Playbook?
Looks good to me.
Looks good. All right, cool. So, I developed this from Limelight. So we raised about $10 million, scaled our sales team. And pretty much off the back of once I left, I started to write down just kind of my sales playbook. And this is really for early stage companies and founders who are trying to transition away from like the founder-led sales process. I mean, that is the key to early stage growth. But this is where I developed this to really kind of give some people some pointers. And, obviously there's a lot of reading that you can do behind the scenes on this, but these are kind of like the Coles notes of the SaaS Sales Playbook to really put your growth into the next level. So, I mean, this is typical what you'd see with early stage companies, founders with domain expertise. They might have a Rolodex, and that's what's going to make up the significant, the sales at first. It's their baby, it's their idea. They've thought about it. They sleep about it. They think about it. That's why they're so good at selling it. That's why founders are so good in the early stages on that sales side. But it does get to a point where you need to step away. You need to hire a team. There's other things in the business you got to do. If anyone's ever tried to fundraise and lead their sales process, you're going to have problems because fundraising in itself is a full-time job. So how do I turn what you've done in the early sales and success that you've had? How do you turn it into a repeatable, scalable sales model? Like, how do you do this? Like, what are the first steps? Where do I go about? How do I remove myself as the CEO and not completely remove yourself? You're obviously going to be involved, but how do I take a step back and start to transition this off to my team? And that's the real core of what we're trying to get at here today. So when I talk about repeatable, the repeatable part of it is obviously, I know a lot of founders are really, really good at their message and getting their message across to people, but how do you turn this into a value proposition that resonates with your audience that you can then hand off to somebody and they can go to market with that? And that's a key to that repeatable side of it. And then the scalable side of it is, what is the process I need to put in place that allows new hires to stay on script, to ramp up quickly, to achieve their quotas, to achieve our sales targets and our sales goals? What process do I have to put in place? Gone are the days where you hire superstar sales reps and, you just say, yeah, off you go. And, they can sell anything to anybody. You need to develop a process and a methodology around this to really help people succeed. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit further here today. So there's a bunch of different ways we can talk about revenue growth. Obviously, there's, increasing your average selling price, increasing buying frequency. And then obviously what we're looking really about is customer acquisition. How do you get more customers? How do you get more users? That's what we're going to dive into a little bit more today. And there's other avenues that you can go down, but let's focus on that first side there. So really what you need to do is define your customer. And I think people usually have a good idea about kind of where they're going, but I mean like hyper targeted. Let's really dive into who is going to be buying my product. And some of this you probably developed in, some of your, industry analysis when you're doing your investor pitch in your first couple ones with your TAM, SAM, SOM, and understanding that side of it, but really driving home who that, ICP is from a bottom up analysis. How many of that specific ICP are there in the market? I want to know to the exact number. Are there 500 companies that could buy it? Are there 5,000 companies? Are there 10,000 companies? And really mapping that out. Who's that industry? What company are they from? Are they similar verticals, different verticals? What are the similarities of those ICPs? What are the differences? Because all of those things matter when we start to build out a value proposition. So really diving into that ICP and knowing who they are. Second piece of that is within each ICP, because you might have multiple ICPs you're selling into. really mapping those buyer journeys. And those buyer journeys are directly down to those job titles, the personalities, the responsibilities, the challenges that they have on a daily basis, the KPIs, the things that keep them up at night, the things they're worried about, all of those buyer personas. So really, this could expand out pretty large. But why we need to do this is because when we're talking about why and why your buyer cares about what you're selling, you really need to drive home the why for that specific buyer, because the why for one buyer might be different for another. So really mapping this out and understanding what those trigger points are for those buyers will help you get a lot further in your sales process and speed up those sales cycles. So we'll be working on that. The value proposition, I'm going to talk about this a ton because the value proposition is so key. And not talking about what your product does, it's talking about the value that your customer gets from using your product and really driving that home. So we're going to go into a little bit more about that in a bit. And what else matters to this customer? You know, trends, fear of missing out, the ROI, sales. What matters to this customer that's really going to drive them as a reason to adopt your product, your service, whatever you're selling. So what matters to this person and really driving that home. And then again, with all of that, building this out, you need to create a content strategy because you're going to have to drip them content in a way that's going to engage them. It's going to educate them. It's going to make them understand what your value proposition is. And it's going to make them want to actually convert and go through your sales process and down that buyer journey. And that content is going to support this. And you're going to have to map against this. This will help you increase those sales cycles, but it will also give you a clear idea of where you might be falling down. So we're going to talk about styles of positioning a little bit right now. And there's three main styles of positioning. There's the head-to-head, and that's clearly when there's no, category exists and there's no clear leader. There's nothing wrong with any one of these positions, just to kind of put that out there. Competition is a good thing, but you just have to have a very clear kind of execution strategy as to why you're going to win. If you're going head-to-head and there's no clear leader, what is it that you are going to have that's going to help you drive that? The second one is big fish, small pond. So, take a sub-segment of a large industry. So you think about, Salesforce owning the CRM market, but there's a ton of niche CRM solutions out there that have certain features that are very attractive for certain sub ICPs and industries. So you can position yourself that way in understanding who you are. And the last one, and the most difficult one by far, is category creation. Category creation was something where Limelight existed in. We were trying to sell an automated workflow for experiential marketing. It really didn't exist at the time when we were going to market. So we need to educate our buyers that they had a problem, because they didn't know they had a problem, because you don't know you have a problem if you don't know there's a solution or you're not doing it right. So really you have to educate them about there could be a better way of them doing their work, get them to buy into that, and then show them the solution across the way. So that's creating a new game, which is definitely the hardest and the longest sales cycles. But also, as a pioneer, it has the ability to be the largest segment that you could go after as well. So here's what I'd like to talk about in terms of value proposition. And this is kind of a little exercise that you can kind of do yourself here to understand it. So in simple terms, what value do you provide to the user? And this is a great one I got, and everybody's probably know what I'm referring to when I say the ride-sharing marketplace. The ride-sharing marketplace, if you're a techie or, you're probably going to understand what a ride-sharing marketplace is, or even what a marketplace is. It's a two-sided marketplace. But when you're talking to a lot of buyers out there in the market, they might not even understand these words. So how do you create the right words, the right language around this to get your value proposition across to someone without the jargon or without the rest of it? So, one way to do it is like, get a ride in 4 minutes or less. Well, now I'm like, well, you got my attention, right? Because you're really talking about value proposition in a way that makes people understand it. And this is from Uber, actually, when they went public. It was their S1 filing. And I saw this in their S1 filing, and I was actually quite interested in this because think about the words they're using here when they talk about their value proposition. So they're saying they're a safe, reliable, affordable, and convenient trip within a few minutes of tapping a button. That is value proposition. That directly relates to the buyer. That directly relates to that user. and understanding it. Yes, I want something that's safe, affordable, reliable, convenient, and I want to have it within a few minutes to touch your button. That is value proposition defined at its best way. And that's what I really like about it. It's not saying, hey, we're the newest ride sharing marketplace out there, because you're going to lose people right away. What does that mean? What's a value proposition? I don't even know, but really diving down into those exact terms. So are you cheaper? Are you better? Are you faster? Are you safer? Are you more reliable? Value proposition, driving that home. And that's really what you need to focus on when you're in your early stages of your sales process. All right. So another quick exercise, you can kind of write this down just to kind of get an idea of where you kind of live in this. So your competitive analysis, if you didn't exist, what would your customers use? What is the workflow that they currently do? And I love the visuals of this when you're kind of mapping this out. What did people do before your solution came around? And what were the pain points? Did it take longer to do that? What were the cost points around that? Did it cost more? Were there, more people involved? What were those, equivalent costs of those? And really mapping this out, because really what you want to do is drive home the cost of doing business the old way or without your solution, and the cost of doing business the new way. And that could be from increased efficiencies. It could be from, a reduced headcount. It could be from a number of things, but really you want to drive that home in a way where you're presenting a business case to your buyer for them to really understand it. So trying to come down with that competitive analysis. What would people do if you weren't around? And then also your key unique attributes. So what features or capabilities do you have that an alternative can't? And this is one of the major things when we talk about SaaS and some of the benefits of having a automated solution. There are features and capabilities that can obviously be duplicated through manual effort, but takes longer. It takes more time. What really sets people apart are the key attributes of a solution that can only be duplicated with software. And that could be data aggregation for simple dashboards. It could be AI solution that combs through data a lot quicker. But what are those key attributes that your solution provides that are really going to differentiate you from everybody else? Value, we kind of just talked about this. So your value proposition, what is the value that people get out of this? So really driving it home. What is the customer? What do they get out of this? And driving that. And who is it? And this is again coming back to that ICP. Who cares about this? Who's going to really want to see a solution like this in place in the market? And then what is the right timing in your market for you to win? What is the right scenario? What does the right buyer's landscape look like that's going to allow you to win this solution? All right. So that's kind of going over some of the early stage stuff that you really need to document, process, write out, have lined up for you to be able to hire a team to ensure success. But then you kind of have to understand, what does your team look like? Well, where do they come from? So really, just trying to map this out in a simple way. What are the different divisions within my group or my different roles and responsibilities from my go-to-market team, from marketing to business development, BDRs, to account executives, to customer success? What are the activities that they should be doing? And what are the KPIs that I can track at a high level? So from the marketing side, giving them the responsibilities of SEO, SEM, those webinars, events, PR, social, organic, and paid, and then really having a top level MQL or top level KPI of a marketing qualified lead. And I have some definitions in here a little bit further. We can dive into that, but I'll probably just say that for a little bit later. But these are really what your marketing team is trying to drive MQLs for the rest of your team. And then they'll pass that off to the BDRs to try and convert that into an actual SQL or an SAL, a sales qualified lead or a sales accepted lead. So what are they doing? What are the activities that BDRs are doing? That we're focusing on your inbound qualification, outbound lead generation. So those are the defined areas where they're looking into. From there, they're going to be measured on the number of SQLs they create, the number of opportunities that they're creating in the pipeline, number of meetings that are booked. So these are some of the metrics that you need to put in place for those BDRs to really understand what they're doing and if they're having success. From that BDR, you're going to pass this off to an account executive. And that account executive is going to work the pipeline. They're going to be providing demos. They're going to be providing workshops. They're going to be negotiating. They're going to be doing sales engineering to understand how it's going to work with the solution. They're going to be doing objection handling. And they're going to be really measured on bookings. How much are they adding to the bookings line for the company? And that's what those account executives are looking at. the last part, and something I'd say I might have been a little bit guilty of myself at Limelight, was customer success and really hiring talented people and hiring up in the customer success area, and really to farm, to grow, to upsell, and to cross-sell within that customer. A lot of times when you're selling, as you go higher up into the enterprise world, often you're going to have people who are going to grow accounts, who are going to nurture accounts to grow them across the organization. You might get a tiny foothold into an organization, and then, it's the tip of the iceberg. The real value of that customer and acquiring it is going to become in the latter half of that, when you're selling across that organization, when you're using champions from one division to sell into another division, it ends up, if you do this well, it's going to decrease your customer acquisition cost. You're going to acquire them a lot cheaper, and it's going to help grow organically across the organization a lot more. So KPIs in that customer success world will be around upsells, renewals, churn, and NPS. So obviously within each one of these, you can dive even further into another sub-segment of this, which is obviously, but this is kind of laying the top level framework of the things you need to think about when you're trying to create this process for your team. So some of the most basic metrics, everybody's probably heard of a lot of these metrics, but things that you're going to have to know on a daily basis. As a founder, you probably already know these, especially if you've already gone to market to try and fundraise. These are some of the core things that your investors are going to ask about, because they're going to want to understand your unit economics. They're going to want to understand the viable nature of your business now and in the future at scale. Will this work at scale, and how are you going to scale it? So your customer acquisition cost, really how much does it cost to acquire a customer, your ARPU, your average revenue per user, and your lifetime value, obviously, the lifetime value of a client. So for early stage founders, some of these numbers aren't necessarily apparent. Maybe you haven't signed enough, or you don't have enough data points. You always have to make an assumption on these, because you do need to have something in place that you can make the decisions you need off of. Having a question mark there does not help you make a decision going forward. So have assumptions in place, have reasons, especially lifetime value. You might not have a true lifetime value if someone signs a 3-year deal in your second year of operations, but you need to have some assumptions around this to really guide you to the right direction. And obviously what you're shooting for is a goal of 3-to-1 on a lifetime value to CAC ratio. And I'm noticing a spelling error in my deck here. Perfect. And then obviously at a 1-to-1 ratio, that's your payback. Your lifetime value equals your CAC. That's great. You've paid it back, but you have the rest of your operational expenses that you need to cover. So the 3-to-1 ratio will allow it for a metric that allows you to drive and have positive unit economics in your business. All right, so early stages. So your early stages, you're a small team, and you're really just starting to look at how to build out your team. The earliest sales team structures are called islands, and an island is really when you are doing everything. You have a full sales cycle sales team, and they're doing prospecting, they're converting, they're closing, they're activating, they're doing customer success. This is very typical in early stage companies, because you don't have the resources or really the data points around specializing people yet. You're still testing some of your hypotheses, you're testing some of the market that you're going to, and you're really trying to gather more information around this, where you have these end-to-end sales team. Definitely when you're going through the hiring process, hiring these early stage people, you want people comfortable across the spectrum. And some people are and some people aren't, but really understanding that, because you do need someone to kind of work across the spectrum of the sales cycle in these early stage companies. And then as you move a little further along, you're going to start to specialize those stages. So introducing business development reps who are going to pass leads to AE, hiving off marketing in its own department. So marketing is going to lead to BDR to AEs. AEs pass over to the customer success. So that's your assembly line. And then further specialization will be pods that will target certain industries, certain verticals, certain geographies, whatever it might be, but further specialization. A lot of that specialization will come down to, if you're going by country, it might be different laws or different languages, different customs in place that they need to have specialization around to be able to be successful in selling that product. Obviously, a lot further down the cycle than what it is right now. All right. So I guess this is something I kind of hinted to earlier, and making sure that you have the right team in place when you're doing this. So I think the traditional model for salespeople in the past was you hire somebody who's really good, and that person is good at selling anything to anybody. They're a rock star, they're a superstar. And then you create a process around the superstar. You put in things in place that they need, that they want, that they've been successful with. And that's not necessarily how you want to design your sales process. You want to design your sales process so you could put anybody in there, and there is the script, the guidelines, the structure in place where anybody, and I'm not going to say anybody, but there is a higher likelihood of dropping somebody in and they're going to be successful. So you start with the process, you start with the messaging, you start with the whole understanding of who you're selling to, the process, the content, the journey, and then you enable them with technology that's going to help them increase their efficiencies on their outbound, dial quicker, talk to more people, and then really focusing the other way. So building it process first and driving it up versus really focusing it on hiring the greatest people that you possibly could. One of my favorite charts, just to kind of outline the different styles of selling across, where you might live. So across your bottom line here, you have your average contract value, your ACV, and up here you have your deals per month. So obviously these are the different types. So obviously if you're only selling ACV, so average contract deals of less than $1,000, your customer acquisition cost is going to have to be a lot lower. So you're going to have to rely on a more marketing generated sales process. So that could be freemium solutions or web sales, kind of into your online sales. So web sales and things, these are things that are a little more commoditized in terms of solutions out there. They're probably a little bit more niche, or not niche products, widget products where they have one use and they're not kind of a system of record type business. So that would be in your web sales. And then as you kind of move up the chain, once you kind of hit into the 12,500 plus ACV, you can start to look at what an inside sales team would look like. Once you start to get higher than that, you get to field sales and local sales. So an interesting thing about this is really understanding kind of where you live here, because there are very big differences in how you're structuring all these different teams based off of what your contract value is. Now, once you get even further down the road, you might have two types of product lines and two types of ICPs. You might have a product line that only sells for an ACV on the lower side, and you might have a product line that's 500 plus. Well, you don't want your local sales reps selling the low product line because it's not going to work, and you don't want the opposite to be true. So really understanding where they are, segmenting it out, and understanding where your products are and where they live in here. Because there's also different ways, transactional sales, solution selling, consultative selling, provocative selling, ABM strategies, and these all vary across the board. But understanding kind of your ACV, your LTV, where you live within that, and do the unit economics make sense for you to deploy some of these strategies. And again, these are just high level thoughts to really get you thinking, like, where do you live in here? You can read books on all the different solutions within here: consultative selling, solution selling, provocative selling, account-based marketing. And even account-based marketing, it doesn't have to be purely enterprise. You can have some really low cost solutions for account-based marketing as well. You just have to read up to understand how you're going to execute some of those things. I got an interesting story just on the inside sales front I just wanted to share at this point. So when we were launching at Limelight, we were selling into automotive, big OEMs, and we had an inside sales team, and we're in the Toronto market up here in Canada. And a lot of the OEMs have their headquarters in Toronto. So our inside sales team had a huge success in going to market in the Toronto area, but we were co-located. So our inside sales team was actually acting like a localized sales team in the Canadian market. And we went to duplicate this strategy in the US. The US market was very different. OEMs are located all over the US. You've got some in Atlanta, some in California, Detroit, New York. And based off of this, our inside sales team in Toronto had a hard time duplicating the success that we had in Canada, because it wasn't a true local sales model when we got to the US, but it was in Canada. So again, you can separate this by having different pods, focusing on different regions or locals, or just distributing your sales team completely. So these are the kind of things that you kind of have to wrap your head around when you're designing this process. From a definition standpoint, I think the decks are all shared and presentations are shared after. So, I mean, there's reading beyond this, but these are just some guidelines for you to look at from what's the difference between, your online, your web sales and whatnot. I also get a big question of what's the difference between web-based sales and online sales. Web-based is kind of like you can click through and purchase your own as you kind of move through it. Online sales might be more through chat and chat bots, but allow you to still kind of sell through that online process. It's just a little bit of a higher customer acquisition cost in that process. And then reading upon reading, you can obviously go through transactional selling, solution selling, consultative selling, provocative selling. I'm definitely not the expert on those. There are books on books written across all of these. So if you want to read up on those, if it fits into your category of where you think your go-to-market strategy is, definitely pick one up and you can dive even further into how to build out that process. Obviously, account-based marketing have been big for, 2, 3, 4 years now, if not longer. Really, account-based marketing is flipping your funnel upside down. It's really knowing who those ICPs are and going after who is my most likely buyer, and identifying them at the top. And then finding influencers within the organization, engaging those key players and creating advocates from those. So that's the key difference there versus the original funnel is really just focusing on top of funnel prospects and not creating a strategy at the organizational level to really penetrate within here. One of my key things that I always looked at for account-based marketing was the circle of influence on a buyer and how do you get to someone. I always had a number in my head. If I could get to somebody, 3 independent sources that were referring to my solution. So that could be, the buyer who's my buyer persona. They saw us at a conference. They had, a PR campaign that was talking about us. They had outreach, and then maybe, somewhere through a friend mentioned us. So if there was like 3 or 4 independent influencers about us, they were more likely to convert throughout our process. And that was just some of the numbers I tracked. So how do you think about it holistically of getting to that buyer, and how do you circle them, the influence around them, so they're seeing you from independent sources and not just from some guy picking up the phone and calling every day or emails. Think about it holistically. How do you influence them across the board? So obviously, your definitions throughout your sales funnel, in your early stages, people are going through an awareness section. They're getting educated about the solution, this the selection of who they're going to be, and then obviously defining those metrics across the board. One of the key things you see early is when you start to implement people is really having strict rules about what those definitions are. The key that you need to have people on board with those definitions is if you want to have usable data across all of your team and your sales rep as you move, everybody's got to be marking things and measuring things based off of the same definitions. Otherwise, garbage in, garbage out. If your bad data is in, it's not going to help you kind of dictate how to make proper solutions going forward. So really having a defined set of solutions around that. So defining what your prospect is, defining what your marketing qualified lead is, defining what an SQL is, a sales qualified lead, and defining what a sales accepted lead is across the board. So really understanding those definitions, have your team understanding what those are, so everybody is marking people the same way. Because really what you're looking for, and I haven't even got to there yet. I'm not going to go into the definitions of this because obviously we can share those with people later, and we can get to some Q&A a little bit earlier here. But obviously the prospects and just understanding what those definitions are, MQL definitions there, putting this into your playbook so your team knows it, knows what's happening. Sales qualified lead, do they hit certain qualification metrics? I've always used BANT for a qualification for my sales leads, budget, authority, time, and need. So really defining that and then going deeper into that and even defining your BANT even further in terms of qualifying somebody, and making sure that the right questions are asked, the right number of people are asked. One thing we always did from an account-based perspective was another interesting stat we tracked was when we were trying to sell into enterprise, we were tracking the number of SALs we had within an organization. We were even tracking how many times we had been on site presenting a workshop. Had we presented to the entire team? Did we talk to CRM? Did we talk to those key components yet? And then we had to hit certain thresholds before we thought we were in a proper position to really have a chance to closing a deal. So just making sure that you track, like, what are the similarities of closed deals, what has worked in the past, and trying to, duplicate those efforts and really tracking the data around that. So obviously with, tracking your data across your conversion rates, you're going to have a certain amount of prospects that convert into MQLs, a certain number of MQLs that are converted to SQLs, SALs. This is where you really want to start thinking about cohort analysis and tracking data, not only across your, yearly, but if you're releasing new features or you release new messaging or you release new sales strategies going to market, you want to track the cohorts there because you want to see how that's impacting your conversion rates everywhere in the funnel. Maybe you release new messaging and you're converting way more prospects to MQLs, but people are still getting stuck in the later stages. You probably need to start looking at some of your messaging, your content within your later stages to help people convert there. So that's why that data is so important about your process, is to really dive into where things are getting bottlenecked, where things are slowing down, and trying to address and correct the behavior there. And then obviously with that, you're going to try and map your content to your buyer journey. So creating content for people in the top of the funnel, creating content for people in the middle of the funnel, and creating content for people at the bottom of the funnel. So those are some of your key things that you're going to want to have to take a look at to really understand across the board. So, bottom of funnel stuff might be actually having, real ROI stories or creating case studies that are specific to your client. Think about it this way from like a customer acquisition cost. If you're, really on the big side and you're whale hunting and your customer acquisition cost, or your lifetime value could be like $3 million, your customer acquisition cost can be a lot lower for it still to make sense. So you can create custom documentation, you can create custom workshops, you can fly your team down. So really think about it from an LTV, a lifetime value perspective. What can I spend to acquire this client? Because you can spend a lot more acquiring larger clients than you can on your smaller clients. But, you have to think about those strategies and what makes sense and what is the LTV on those clients. All right, so that's kind of like a quick summary on that side of it. The last thing I thought was really helpful for me was really understanding industry averages, because I was in the market and I was, building my team and my strategy, and really trying to just understand, am I in the middle of the pack? Am I an outlier? Am I doing this right? And I always use the analogy, if you have the blueprints to build a house, you're going to be a lot quicker building that house than if you have no blueprints and you don't know which direction. You're constantly looking up, YouTube videos on how to build this and how to build that. It's going to take you forever to build the house. But if you have the blueprints, you're going to move a lot quicker. So understanding how you relate to those industry averages will help you make sure that you're moving in the right direction, that you're not, an outlier in terms of what some of your numbers are. So one key thing kind of in your early stages is you need to take into consideration is how long does it take for an account executive to ramp up? And on average, it's 3 to 5 months. So that's important for when you're creating your pipelines, your quota estimates, your commission schedules. How long does it take for someone to ramp up? How long does it take them to actually put people in their pipeline before they start closing? And on average, it's 3 to 5 months. So it's something to keep in mind while you're building this out. And for anyone who's, on the CR role or mapping some of their revenue and their kind of your sales quotas across the board, you got to remember that, rep tenure in the industry is around 2.5 years. So there is going to be people who are falling off and will have that ramp up period, which will always be less than what your total quotas are when you're doing those numbers and plugging them into your models. All right, so some of this makes a lot more sense. So as a function of your average contract value, the percentage of your pipeline increases from sales development reps. So as your contract value goes higher, obviously you're going to have more likely to have SDRs as part of the team. So that's an interesting thing to kind of take aware of if you're mapping to this. So obviously on the lower end of the spectrum, if you're selling HCVs that are on the lower side around, 5,000 or so, you're probably not going to have the specialization to have multiple people on your team. You're probably not going to have SDRs handing it off to AEs if you're selling low ACVs. So just kind of intuitive, but something to keep in mind as you're building out your team. Also, the percentage of pipe sourced from marketing. So obviously on the lower end of the spectrum, when you're selling lower ACV solutions, you're going to have more of your pipeline sourced from your marketing initiatives. And then as you go up, you can imagine into big enterprise sales, you're going to have even less source from marketing. And the reason for that is obviously, to close a $500,000 deal, you are going to be very much more whale hunting. You're going to be on the road at conferences, at meetings, doing workshops, more involved with the whole sales process. So less likely that it's going to be derived from marketing sources. At what point do I start to move to an assembly line? When does it start to make sense? So an assembly line being, I have an SDR that passes to an AE, that passes to customer success, account management. And these are kind of the stats around that. So seeing that in the ACV level of around 25 to 50, 64% of the teams are structured that way. Thought that was very interesting just to see if you're falling into that category or not. And then obviously just some basic guidelines on just pay and what people are paying. I mean, the basic for a lot of it is a 50-50 split between your base salary and your OTE. So based off of that, structuring what that OTE will look like. So one of the things when you're trying to figure this out, I see this question quite often in a lot of chat rooms and founder chat rooms being like, what do I pay people? And I guess one of the biggest things, and, do some reading on the Renaissance rep, which is a great kind of term for early stage salespeople who are involved in product, they're involved in development, they're involved in marketing, they're involved in sales, they're involved in sales process, and strictly producing a commission structure that's based off of sales for those Renaissance rep will ultimately result in a failure. You're going to have to be a little more creative on how you compensate people in those early stages. And that could be through more KPIs. It could be through, a percentage from meetings booked, a percentage from, demos conducted, on-site visits, value that's created. You're going to have to be a little more creative on how you can create the commission structure to get those early stage reps to hit their OTE, because those sales numbers are just not that predictable at that early stage. So just making sure that you have a structure in place that compensates them. A second thing, especially in early stage companies, some years are great at early stage before you hit the hockey stick growth. It might be 2-3 years, 4 years before you hit the hockey stick growth. And measuring someone just on those revenue numbers, you need to measure people on the performance throughout the funnel. So measuring people on conversions and their activities throughout the funnel and performance on that, and compensating people based off of those activities and not just results is very key to creating a solid team, to creating a happy team, and creating a motivated team to keep them working. Sales reps like to win. Allow them to win. If they're constantly failing, they're going to be, unmotivated. They're going to be looking for other jobs where they are actually winning. Oh, right. I think I went the wrong way there. Here, going back this way. So this was just levels of activities. What should I expect from my team? So dials per day were 33. Quality conversations were 6 per day. Demos per week were averaged at 7. And obviously there's ranges across your spectrum of what you're selling. If you're selling $500,000, NetSuite solutions for ERP systems for your clients, you're going to be demoing a lot less than that, probably around 1. And then if you're on the flip side, demoing something online where the conversion rate's very transactional, you're going to have a lot more. But just that idea of where it might fall into. And then the last piece is just really like, what are the tools that people are using to really augment their sales process? And that's kind of interesting as well, just understanding what are the first tools that I should have besides the CRM. I mean, most people are going to know that. But the first thing people are buying is email automation, tracking and cadences. Second thing people are buying is contract data, account intelligence. Third thing people are buying are contract e-signatures, so DocuSign, e-sign, whatever it might be. LinkedIn Navigator. Now, these are just averages, obviously, but just understanding when people are buying those and what makes sense and where they are in the pipeline. Everybody's solutions are going to look different, but for some of the email automation tools that sales rep can use, really, really increase the efficiency of them. So understanding that, putting that into your customer acquisition cost with kind of the solution set that you're going to provide to your team to help them be more efficient is quite important. So here's some plans that are kind of dictated out there that people could kind of mimic for their own solutions out there. And then obviously hiring management and hiring the team as you kind of move up, and what a VP of sales and what a manager and director. And these are just broad numbers, but for me, I was Googling this over and over again to trying to find some basic guidelines on where I should be looking. And here's some numbers just to kind of provide you with some early indications of what that should look like. So that was it for me for now. Excited to share that with everybody and would love to dive into some Q&A at this point. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Why don't I pose the questions to you? I've been kind of moderating a little bit, monitoring the chat. Just Perfect. Before we get into regular Q&A, will you be able to, I know that we've got these slides, will we be able to share them with everybody after your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to share them. Happy to talk about that and, share my insights and further insights as much as I can.
Okay, perfect. Well, then what we'll do is we'll make sure to put those in the Slack channel. And then if people have any other questions around them after Q&A, then they can ask you there.
Perfect.
All right. First question. So Franco is with a B2B SaaS company with an ideal ACV around 100K a year. What strategy do you recommend the most? ABM?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this briefly. So ABM strategies don't need to be this outrageously expensive strategy. You can find an ABM strategy that is right for you. And it just has to do with how generalized your outbound reach is within the ABM solution. So I'm a huge fan of ABM. I'm a huge fan of bottom-up analysis to really understand who that target is and who you're going after, understanding your key players, knowing more about them than what they know. That's your key to really selling, and knowing your buyer, knowing those personas, knowing what matters to them. So I would definitely recommend trying to find an ABM solution that works for you guys.
Nice. Another anonymous attendee asked what the reference was for the data that you were presenting, and if it was based on a certain industry, and was wondering if you had any links to a study or a report. I believe this question came in around the time you were talking about like comp structure for AEs.
Yeah, sure. So that was, I think it's Bridgewater. Is it not Bridgewater Associates? There was I'll look it up and I'll share the report on it. I'll share a link on the chat after. They do a report every year on this. That really goes through it all and kind of dictates some of that. So I'll share that after and get that to everybody.
Are you thinking about the Bridge Groups?
Bridge Group, that's it. I was thinking Bridgewater, but it's Bridge Group. Yeah, it's Bridge Group's reference. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we can find that and we can get that thrown in Slack as well so that you guys can take a look. So the next one here is from Evan. They are about 1.5 years into creation of their sales process using many aspects of what you're presenting. Now that they have some baseline data, where would you start in refining the process?
I think the answer to that question lies within your data. I mean, really, it's understanding where your holes are from that data. I think as founders, sometimes we get drawn into the illusion of our solution is going to work one way, but we're not trusting the data of what we're seeing. Especially in the early stages or category creation. So you might have data that, you look back at it and you're like, wow, like 85% of our revenue is coming from this specific kind of area. But if I look at my outbound reach for my sales team, we're spending 50% over here. Now that's not lining up if that's like a consistent stat throughout. So I think it's just aligning it and really trusting the data that you have. And that's why creating a process to track and understand the data throughout your process is so key, because it's that blind faith that you're like trying to go in one direction, but the market's telling you something completely different. Follow the data. The data is your friend. Following your gut might hurt you sometimes in that sense. So that's what I'd be focusing on, really.
Nice. And R2 asks, what is your ACV?
For my current company where we're at, our ACV is per year about 20,000 per year, and then lifetime value is about 50 or 60. So that's kind of where we are.
Nice. And our last one in here, if anyone has any other questions, you can pop them in Q&A now. But the last one for now is from Ryan Schultz. He says, that was great, Russ. Tons of info. Can you talk a little bit about comp for marketing? Have you comped marketing based upon performance KPIs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess any type of comp structure, I think there's a lot of criteria that goes into it. And, for early stage companies, I think the resources you have to manage a lot of these are your challenging parts of it. You don't want a comp structure that takes a long time to design, takes a long time to implement, takes a long time to calculate. It slows you down just as a founder. So, one of the key things is, you definitely want to comp against it. And if you do have the time, those different channels are all very different. And you're going to have, you don't want ultimately, you don't want people to game your comp structure. So if you're only comping on MQLs and MQLs come through a certain channel 90% of the time, but you really want to explore some other channels, it's really tough to motivate that person to go explore these other channels if they're not compensated for that effort. So it's just really that balance and, having somebody aligned with what their comp structure is for the goals that you want to do. If you want to go test a new channel because you're implementing a new strategy, how are they going to be compensated for working in that channel as well?
Nice. Thank you so much. And Daniel, you just asked what channel we're sharing slides in. I believe that one of my colleagues has type that answer there for you. Let us know if you're still looking for that. And if anyone else has any other questions, now's your last chance. Well, not really. You can still ask them in the Slack community. Last chance for a live answer. But yeah, Russ will be hanging out in that Slack channel for a little while after this. Anything that you didn't get answered, you can ask there. We'll make sure to include the slides there. So if any other questions come up, how about afterwards? If people kind of take the slides, have a look, and then they've got more questions for you maybe in the days to come, how can people reach out to you? How can they learn more?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely connect me on LinkedIn. I've got a couple other presentations on my LinkedIn profile you can go take a look at, targeted around earlier stage, how to create pitch books or pitch decks and pipeline velocity and stuff like that. So happy to share some of my other content there. So reach out on LinkedIn and, excited to be part of the session here we got today.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Russ. There was so much great content there. I'm looking forward to kind of scrolling through those slides again myself. I think there's definitely a ton to take in. Super, super valuable. Thank you so much for being a keynote for us. Thank you to all the attendees who were in this talk. For those of you that are signed up for the next one, the next talk is going to be on the next normal. Attracting talent in a post-COVID world becomes even harder. I'm sure that's something that we can all we feel all resonates right now. So that's going to be with Nick. And I'm actually not sure how to pronounce his last name. Colin, I'm going to defer to you on that one.
Yeah, put me on the spot. I don't know either. I'm going to guess Chromidas.
Okay.
But I'm guaranteed that's
we can
wrong.
Ask him.
So we'll get Nick to make fun of me for my terrible pronunciation.
Perfect. So you guys if you're signed up for that, you can check your emails for the link to that room. If you're watching on Twitch, just hang out and we'll be chatting to Nick in just a couple of minutes here. Thanks again, Russ.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Russ. Great seeing you again, bud.
Yeah, good seeing you. Take care, guys.
Right on. Cheers.
Bye.